Good morning and welcome to Arise News Now. I'm Gavin Ramjohn in London. It's Monday the 5th of August and our top story at this hour. The United States has extended a number of its embassy closures in North Africa and the Middle East by a week. The embassies were closed as a precaution on Sunday after an al-Qaeda threat that the US said was the most serious in years. 19 US embassies and consulates will be closed until next Saturday, out of what they described as an abundance of caution. Damien Jones reports.
The al-Qaeda threat that closed US embassies in the Middle East and North Africa on Sunday is the most serious in years, according to US lawmaker briefed on intelligence. Senator Saxby Chambliss, the top Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee, spoke to NBC's Meet the Press.
Been an awful lot of chatter out there. Chatter means conversation among terrorists about the planning that's going on, very reminiscent of what we saw pre-9/11. We didn't take heed on 9/11 in the way that we should, but here I think it's very important that we do take the right kind of planning as we come to the close of Ramadan. We know that's always an interesting time for terrorists. We're also, 38 days, 37 days away from the September 11 anniversary. So we're paying very, very close attention to the chatter that's going on. And I can tell you, David, this is the most serious threat that I've seen in the last several years.
A September the 11th attack last year killed the US ambassador to Libya and 3 other Americans in Benghazi.
Now, there were celebrations on the streets of Harare on Sunday morning after Robert Mugabe was elected as president of the country Zimbabwe again. The Electoral Commission announced that Mugabe won the presidential election with 61% of the vote compared with 34% for rival Morgan Tsvangirai. Mugabe's ZANU-PF party won 158 of the 210 parliament seats, giving it a 2/3 majority in the government cabinet. At a press briefing on Saturday, opposition leader Tsvangirai told reporters he will go to court to overturn the result of the July 31st elections. So we're joined now on the line by Shahan Ramkissoon, who's been following the events in Harare for us. He joins us now by Skype. Shahan, good to speak to you. The MDC then calls the poll results fraudulent, and there have been reports of attacks on some of the members of the MDC. What are people in the country thinking about all this?
Well, a couple of Zimbabweans that we spoke to over the weekend, after it was announced that ZANU-PF did win, were really disappointed, Gavin, that there really was a so-called mood of mourning, as Morgan Tsvangirai put it. Even our cab driver said that there was nothing to celebrate. But, while we were inside the hotel, we did hear people driving around hooting and celebrating that Robert Mugabe did win. So there seems to have been mixed reaction to this.
So there's been condemnation, of course, from the international world, the US, the UK, and now Germany and Australia adding their voices of concern to this. How will the controversy affect Zimbabwe's reputation on the international stage?
Well, Zimbabwe will continue to have the reputation that it has had over the past couple of years. The EU doesn't look like it's going to ease sanctions on Zimbabwe because it does not believe that this was a fair election at all, it seems, from one of the statements they've releasing so far. But ZANU-PF is quite resilient. It said that it doesn't really matter what the international community thinks about Zimbabwe because they are going to try to build their economy themselves. But there are some within the ruling party who do say that they need the EU to go with what SADC and the AU is saying, that it was free and fair because they could benefit if sanctions were actually eased. So there's different stances coming from within the ZANU-PF on what the international community really thinks about the country.
So South African President Jacob Zuma has given his congratulations to Mr. Mugabe. What does Mr. Mugabe now plan to do with the country now that he's won power again?
Well, he's obviously still trying to build the economy of Zimbabwe. The first step was actually converting the currency to the US dollar, and they seem to have done quite well with that, given the circumstances. So he said during his campaign that if he was re-elected, creating jobs would be one of the major policy directions for Zimbabwe. And he's obviously got a lot of support from people because that was what he was going with in the election campaign. So that'll be the first course of business for Robert Mugabe. Question is whether he can actually do that, given the international community's stance on the elections.
So the MDC, Mr. Changarai's party, are saying they're going to the Constitutional Court to present evidence of fraud. What's the likely outcome of what they're going to present to the court?
Well, they actually have a dossier which they're going to present to SADC as well, which is one of the observer teams in Zimbabwe. Now, they, of course, want them to investigate the irregularities. And this is the same information, the dossier, which they will use to create an affidavit and then take to the Constitutional Court. They have 7 days to do so, to challenge the elections, outlining the number of acts of intimidation that they recorded during the election, the number of people who were turned away. Now, that's the one ground that they can actually go to court and say this was not fair, because there were thousands of Zimbabweans who were turned away in MDC strongholds. And that will be the basis of their argument.
OK, I think we've got a few problems with the line there. Thanks very much for that there, Shahan. Now, Iran's new President Hassan Rouhani was sworn in an open session of parliament yesterday. He told the West that the only way to interact with Iran is through dialogue and called on them to abandon the language of sanctions. Jason Mansray reports.
The sound of music in the Iranian parliament ahead of the new president taking the oath of office. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who won his election by a wide margin over conservatives, takes the oath. In an address, he vowed to improve women's rights, saying it is a priority for his government. He also called for mutual respect when it comes to the international community.
So I will say this if you want the right response. Don't speak with Iran in the language of sanctions, speak in the language of respect.
The United States said Sunday it is prepared to work with the new government if Iran will engage seriously on the nuclear issue.
Now, later today, US Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham will arrive in Cairo. Their task to try and end the showdown between Egypt's interim government and the supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi. Graham and Lindsey are due to meet members of the military-backed government and Morsi loyalists. It'll be a difficult task. Anti-American sentiment has risen amongst both sides since Morsi was ousted in June. In a bid to ease tensions, the interim administration dropped leaflets over the largest Muslim Brotherhood protest site outside the Rabba Mosque. They promised demonstrators would not be arrested if they hadn't committed a crime. And in northern Uganda, hundreds of children have been affected by years of ongoing violence, with many of them being forced into combat roles by militant rebel groups. Many have been left with physical and mental scars from the violence, but now a new and innovative form of group therapy is helping war-affected children in northern Uganda cope.
Aldo Okote was abducted from his village in northern Uganda when he was 12 by the Lord's Resistance Army, a rebel group that emerged in the late 1980s. To initiate him into the LRA, his captors forced him to shoot his fellow captives and then dance in the blood that pooled beside the bodies.
All the captives had to jump over the dead bodies to change us mentally. They did it purposefully. They even brought bodies from far away from us to jump over, to toughen us up.
After 13 years fighting for the rebel group in Darfur and Central African Republic, Aldo was wounded by the Ugandan army in the Democratic Republic of Congo and returned home. But like many other former abductees, the transition back to civilian life has been far from easy. According to a 2012 study done by Harvard University, over 80% of war-affected children in northern Uganda suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and psychological distress. Aldo has suffered from PTSD and severe depression, but a 16-week therapy program, developed by a US-based health center, has helped. Here, groups are encouraged to share their experiences with each other, as well as to provide each other with advice on how to work through difficult emotions like guilt, fear, and anxiety. The sessions focus on talking and art therapy, making them accessible to everyone, whether or not you can read or write. Eunice Okello was snatched by the LRA when she was 11 and held for over a year before she escaped. Returning home, she also suffered from depression, feelings of isolation, and terrifying flashbacks. A few weeks ago, she joined a therapy group.
Some friends encouraged me to join the group, and I saw how their lives have been changed.
A lack of access to medical professionals and the cost of medication means that antidepressants are out of reach for most Ugandans. But the group therapy sessions are run by community volunteers who receive training. According to the Christian NGO World Vision, which is funding the treatment program, around 80% of the sufferers recover by the end of the 16 weeks.
It is going to help people to create peace and unity among themselves in such a way that illness which was there, it will not be there. They will see each other like normal people.
With about 25,000 former child soldiers in Uganda, the challenge of treating and rehabilitating those with psychological trauma is considerable. With group therapy, it's hoped that it's not too late for the healing process to begin.
Now, with restaurants in Japan, they've come up with a unique way of helping tourists order their food. Instead of reading from a menu or struggling through the language barrier, food outlets are turning to plastic replicas of soup, rice and even ice cream to help hungry tourists.
Sushi, breaded pork, or noodle soup. These Japanese dishes might look tasty, but they're made of plastic. The only ingredients used in this kitchen are these coloured liquids. People come here to learn the secrets behind making the dishes that pop up in the displays of so many restaurants in Japan. On the menu today, tempura battered prawns that almost look better than the real thing. But what's the point of food you can't eat?
The restaurants display these plastic dishes to draw in clients. It's useful. Sometimes it's difficult to know what you're going to get just from reading the menu, but with these replicas, you know what you'll end up with.
This display food is a welcome help for starving tourists in Tokyo. Translated menus, when you can find them, can be quite obscure and staff rarely speak English.
Yes, I point at the food and I just say, I want this, I want this. It's too easy because choosing from a list is impossible. And instead with the plastic food, I look at this and I take this, okay?
There's a catch though. Japanese dishes can be deceptive. This fish pate, for example, has surprised many a tourist.
This omelette, like an omelette, but I'm not sure that it's omelette.
This journalist is so passionate about plastic food, he wrote a book about it. In it, he explains a phenomenon that started back in the 1920s.
These replicas are really a three-dimensional medium. When you look at them, it's like you're tasting the dish for the first time. You can imagine the flavor and even guess whether it's healthy. That's what I mean by the title, The Japanese Who Eat With Their Eyes.
Originally made by hand, these dishes are often industrially produced now. But in his little workshop, this replica chef is preserving a mouth-watering art form the traditional way.
So in sport, England could retain the Ashes today with a helping hand from the bad British weather. The home side trail Australia by 331 runs overnight, but lead 2-0 overall in the series with 2 left to play. If the weather stops play today, the match will finish in a draw, meaning the Aussies have no chance of winning outright. And in tennis, Juan Martín del Potro of Argentina overcame a shaky start to beat America's John Isner in 3 sets to win the City Open. Playing in his first tournament since losing in an epic Wimbledon semi-final to Novak Djokovic, Del Potro converted 4 of 6 break-point chances to win in just under 90 seconds. The win will put the big-serving Argentinian in a good position ahead of the final major of the year, the US Open, which is in a few weeks. And NBA star Kobe Bryant has been speaking about his recovery from an Achilles tendon injury after pulling out of the season early. The 34-year-old LA Lakers player has undergone surgery in April and said the surgical procedure was chosen, it was innovative and had paid off well. The team were on a tour of Shenzhen in China with riot police on hand to patrol a crowd of 20,000. That's all for now. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you soon.